Hello, everyone, and welcome to Carpet City Cinema, a Gila Films podcast. I'm David Weaver, and we are coming at you just a few days after Christmas, in between that and New Year's. If you've been following the Gila Films channel over on YouTube, you'll have noticed that we finally did upload that Christmas TV episode I talked about a few episodes back, the 1952 Christmas episode of the anthology series Family Theater, which was titled A Star Shall Rise. It's a retelling of the Nativity story, directed by the great John Brahm, director who came over from Germany and kind of got a little bit of a name for himself in the 40s for such films as The Lodger and Hangover Square and The Locket, and had a tendency to bring like this film noir look to the movies he did, even if they weren't necessarily dead center in the film noir genre. I mean, The Locket is really this kind of like, it's an amazing film. I can't recommend it enough, from 1946, but it's this like very thickly layered psychological noir is what I call it. And The Lodger is another take on the Jack the Ripper story, a remake of an Alfred Hitchcock film. And Brahm did do some more traditional noirs, such as Singapore, but by this time, he still doing feature films, but he was also doing episodes of TV shows such as this and The Twilight Zone. And it took me a little bit longer to get it up on the YouTube channel than I had originally planned. The print, I had a 16 millimeter TV print of it and had that scanned by a guy I know. And when I was going through and trying to clean up the splices in it, found out that it was missing a tiny bit of footage. It was missing part of the, just a hair of the opening title credits. And also, the show would have this closing message, at least this episode did. I'm assuming all the episodes did. This closing message from the priest, the father, Patrick Peyton, who produced the show and was kind of like a host of it. And so this print was missing that footage. So I had to take that stuff from a standard definition copy and then integrate it into the high def scan. But we got it up there Christmas Eve, just in the nick of time for you to celebrate with, and already at 100 views, which is pretty impressive, I think, considering like there are many copies of this online, which I think are pretty much all sourced from DVDs or standard def copies. This, as far as I know, is the only one that's actually taken from a film element. So cool to see that some people are checking it out. It's just a nice little thing to kind of get up there on the Gila Films channel. And hoping to continue to do stuff like that down the road with some other prints that I have in my collection. Had a couple passings I just wanted to touch on, the most recent being Tom Smothers, who just died a few days ago, age 87, who, along with his younger brother, who's still with us, Dick Smothers, they hosted the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, which was a very ahead of its time variety show in the late 60s, which got some attention for tackling, with its successful sense of humor, very topical issues of the time that other shows kind of wanted to stay away from, and was very much appreciated by the younger set. The interesting thing back then, this is kind of in the era where you'd have shows like the Andy Griffith Show and the Beverly Hillbillies, and the other Paul Henning shows like Green Acres and Petticoat Junction. And these shows would have huge viewership numbers, but the people who were watching these shows weren't really the ideal demographic for advertisers. Being rural, being older, the advertisers wanted to get the attention of the younger people, more hip to things going on. And so, I wonder, that was definitely the kind of audience that was watching stuff like the Smothers Brothers. And, kind of interestingly also, Star Trek was another series like that Star Trek didn't have huge numbers. I don't know that they ever posted the numbers that Smothers Brothers had, but the thing about Star Trek, like the Smothers Brothers, was that they were hitting that key demographic. But this was kind of like right before, programming, the people in charge of programming really were kind of catching on to this. The difference between having big numbers in terms of your viewership versus key numbers, hitting those key demographics where the advertising was really going to hit home with. And then that's why part of the reason why you had the huge rural purge, as it's called, a couple years after this, where all those shows like the Paul Henning shows like Hillbillies, Beverly Hillbillies, and by this time it was Mayberry RFD had taken over from Andy Griffith's show, and these other series, they were just completely all canceled. And the difference with the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour as opposed to Star Trek was it was much more of a success initially, right from the get-go. And it ended up, meeting its demise, unlike Star Trek, which was because of lower viewership numbers. With the Smothers Brothers, it was just the constant battles with network executives over the kind of material that it was willing to tackle and that kind of content, which was kind of controversial at the time, and they just kind of abruptly pulled it. But Tom Smothers, he went on to also appear in a number of films. He starred in one of Brian De Palma's early movies, Get to Know Your Rabbit, which co-starred Catherine Ross and Orson Welles. He was in The Informant with Matt Damon, and other films like Pandemonium, which is like the kind of like horror comedy, Serial from the early 80s, Silver Bears. So, definitely had a huge influence, both he and his brother Dick, with their show on television entertainment that would follow. We also lost Japanese actor Kenpachirô Satsuma, which please forgive me if that's not the correct pronunciation, age 76. And he was very well known to fans of kaiju films, the giant monster films of Japan, because he played Godzilla for a good decent run throughout the 80s and 90s. So Godzilla was originally played by an actor named Haruo Nakajima, who took on the role from the release of the first film in 1954 all the way up through 1972. And the last film, I believe, that Nakajima was in was Godzilla versus the Smog Monster. And interestingly, Kenpachirô Satsuma was in that movie as well, making his first appearance in a kaiju role. He played the Smog Monster, Hedorah. And then from there, he played Gigan twice in Godzilla versus Gigan and Godzilla versus Megalon. But he would actually take on the mantle of the Big G, Godzilla, in 1984 when they made The Return of Godzilla, which was the first Godzilla movie in just about a decade that had been made. And he would be the actor to play Godzilla from that film up in every subsequent film up through 1995's Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. So that was a total of 7 movies that he played Godzilla in. So definitely a tip of the hat to him. And lastly, just wanted to pay tribute to actor James McCaffrey, who passed away at age 65. Now, McCaffrey's screen work, he's probably best known for his small screen work. He was a regular on Rescue Me, and prior to that had been on the series Viper. Guest starred on a lot of different shows. I know him, being a Law & Order fan, from a spin he gave on Law & Order Special Victims Unit. Probably his best known role, though, is actually in video games. Because he was the voice of Max Payne in that franchise. And he also showed up in a number of films. He was in The Truth About Cats and Dogs, American Splendor, Spike Lee's She Hate Me, and also was on the TV series of She's Gotta Have It. But just want to really kind of take a second to pay respects to him, because he's actually a local, born in Albany, New York, the state capital, only about 30 minutes away from here. And liked his work when I saw him, and I thought he had a really great physical presence. And so just kind of, especially at such a young age, sad to see him pass on. Not a lot in the way of new announcements for titles because of the holidays, but one that Kino Lorber, our reliable KLSC, dropped was William Friedkin's 1987 film Rampage, which I don't believe even had, at least not in the U.S., a DVD release ever. This is one that's kind of been highly requested. This is old school Miramax, 1987 Miramax film. And it's about a serial killer played by Alex MacArthur, who comes to trial. And the district attorney prosecuting the case, played by Michael Biehn, is more of a liberal bent by nature, but then decides to seek the death penalty just because of the heinous nature of this killer's acts. And there are apparently 2 different cuts of this film, Friedkin's original cut and a subsequent edit. And Kino Lorber has said that they're going to have an alternate ending on the disc, which doesn't really clarify which cut they're going to put on there. But still, just would be interested to see this finally get a good release. Friedkin has always been highly regarded for his work in this field of kind of like the crime slash suspense slash horror, those kind of where those genres kind of cross over. Of course, The Exorcist, and a lot of fans of Cruising and To Live and Die in L.A., and of course, crime-wise, The French Connection, the masterpiece that is. So, it will be cool to see this. I've never seen this one before, so it'll be great to finally get my eyes on this one. So, Christmastime. That's what we just made our way through, and every year. One of the movies that I keep revisiting at this time of year, which most people would not think of as a Christmas movie, but that is the association I have with it, is the one we're going to talk about in this episode, which is from 1974, and it's called The ODESSA File. This is adapted from the best-selling novel that was published 2 years earlier, 1972, by Frederick Forsyth, author of such other novels which made their ways to the big screen as The Day of the Jackal and The Dogs of War. And the film opens up late November 1963 and in Germany, West Germany. And the protagonist is a freelance journalist named Peter Miller, played by Jon Voight. And the big news of the moment is JFK having just been assassinated. So the film starts out, it's nighttime, it's late November. Voight's driving through the streets, completely decorated with, beautifully decorated with Christmas lights and decorations. And he pulls over and listens to a broadcast announcing that Kennedy has actually passed away at Parkland Hospital, and ends up having his attention drawn to a passing emergency vehicle. And in the hopes of finding a news story, heads over, follows it, and finds out that what's being dealt with is that an old man had committed suicide, had gassed himself to death. And he gets this information from his friend who's on the police force. And so the next day, or shortly thereafter, this friend on the police force hands him a diary that had been found among the possessions of this deceased man, and tells him he should take a look at it. And so as Voight pores over this manuscript, he finds it's an accounting of this man's experiences during the Holocaust and how he was imprisoned to a concentration camp with his wife. His wife did not survive, and how the commandant of this concentration camp was a man named Edward Rushman, played by the Academy Award-winning actor Maximilian Schell, who was a sadist, a butcher, as he was referred to. And the diary takes up events until the liberation of the camp, at which point this elderly man, whose name is Solomon Tauber, who was young at the time of the Holocaust, he recounts in this diary how he saw Roshman get away from the camp, escape before the Allies could capture him. And as Voight digs more into the story, he goes back to this guy's apartment and tracks down a friend of his who also was a victim of the Holocaust. He finds out that the reason Tauber committed suicide at this moment was because he had seen Roshman recently in Germany and had gone to the authorities about it and had basically been ignored. And this just, was the last straw. He took his own life. And now Voight, he's become engrossed by this story, decides to set about seeing what exactly happened. Is Roshman alive? What's going on? And so that's the setup of the story. Now, why do I watch this at Christmas time? Well, the bulk of the film takes place over that kind of Christmas period. It starts in late November, and it basically ends in it's like January, February of the next year. And they get you with Christmas right from the get-go, because the movie, over the opening credits, they play the song Christmas Dream, which was a song by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice. And Andrew Lloyd Webber, of course, known for his many famous stage productions, The Phantom of the Opera, and Cats. He actually did the music score to this movie. It was the second and last time he ever did a music score for a film. An original music score, that is. Obviously there have been subsequent works based on his productions, but this was following his first film, Gumshoe, the Stephen Frears film with Albert Finney. This was the second last time he ever did an original score for a movie. So Christmas Dream is sung over the opening credits by Perry Como, who I'm a big Perry Como fan, especially at the holiday times because he did so many Christmas specials. And so the entire opening sequence with the titles is, like I said, it's Jon Voight driving through Germany at nighttime, beautifully decorated for Christmas with this Christmas song playing over the credits. And the first part of the film continues to be set at Christmas time. There's a key scene set when Jon Voight and his girlfriend, played by Mary Tam, are going Christmas shopping and run into what shall we say is a dangerous incident. And I first saw this film. This was one of those movies that my grandfather introduced me to. He used to have the Good Times VHS tape of this, and my memories of watching it as a kid, I saw this at a pretty young age, just was really ingrained to me. Those Christmas aspects of it, and so in the film also has there's scenes with snowfall and everyone's dressed up in a wonderful 1970s or 60s, depending on how you look at it. We'll get into the time accuracy of this movie later. Wintry garb. It just has a great wintry Christmas feel to it. So this is, from a topical viewpoint, probably not the kind of movie you would think of as a Christmas film, but it's definitely one that I always associate with the holiday, and I watch it pretty much every year. Yeah, I love it. And the thing about this was I love it. I love this movie, and kind of the thing I want to get into in talking about it is how we love things that are sometimes are from our youth for mostly a nostalgic reason. Oftentimes we'll have a TV show we watched when we were a kid, and it'll be something that we're a big fan of, and then maybe we don't see it for like 25, 35 years, and we go back to revisit it, and we can kind of see why it appealed to us, but at the same time, we also can see how the quality does not necessarily live up to the memory. And the interesting thing about the ODESSA File, maybe because I've revisited it so much over the years, it's not something that I had this big gap from the first time I saw it till now. It's, I keep going back to it despite the fact that I see a lot of problems with it. Like the thing about this film is, it's not a movie that I would necessarily recommend to other people in the same sense that I would say, random example, because we mentioned earlier in this episode, The French Connection, which is another movie that I watch a lot of times at Christmas time because the opening is, Gene Hackman dressed up as Santa Claus. And a lot of that takes place during a cold, wintry New York City. But The French Connection is a movie I would instantly recommend to other people because it is truly a great film. And the ODESSA File is not on that level. I would not even say it's a very good film. I think it's a solidly good film. It's just like, yeah, okay, good movie, good meat and potatoes movie. There are some really key flaws with it. And it always gets me thinking about it whenever I go back to watch it each year is why do I keep coming back to this film? It can't just be purely nostalgia, can it? Because I would probably be over it by now. I probably wouldn't be revisiting it every year. I feel like I'm missing out on something. Why do I keep going back to watch this movie every year, even though I know it's not a great film or even a very good film? What is it that brings me back? There must be, why do I like this film so much past the obvious problems I have with it? And yeah, that's just kind of why I wanted to dive into this. So let's start with the problems I have with the film, because they're kind of like the anchor around my neck, or it keeps holding me down, making me think, why do I keep going back to this flick? And front and center, I'd say, maybe, I don't know if I'd say it's the number one problem, but it's one of the more prominent issues I have with this film is Jon Voight. Now, I like Jon Voight. I think he has a really good presence at this point in his career. I'm a huge fan of Deliverance. Really enjoyed Midnight Cowboy. Like his work later on as he kind of evolved into a character actor with films like Heat. And of course, we're talking about Jon Voight, and winter movies have to mention Runaway Train. And I think it's worthwhile exercise to look at Voight's filmography for a second. So this film came out in 1974, so let's go back to 1969, which is when Midnight Cowboy comes out. So that film, big deal, won Best Picture Director and Screenplay. He got nominated for Best Actor along with Dustin Hoffman. That comes out in 1969. And same year, 1969, comes out a movie called Out of It, which is directed by a guy named Paul Williams. It's not a really well-known film, but it's definitely of that whole counterculture vibe of the time. And these are release dates I'm going by. That may have even been filmed before Midnight Cowboy. 1970, he has a supporting part in Catch-22, the Mike Nichols film, and he also has released a second film with Paul Williams, directed by Paul Williams. And just to clarify, this is not Paul Williams, the songwriter, a totally different guy. And that film's called The Revolutionary. So that's 69, 70. And again, I don't know if some of these films, what order they were filmed in. 71, no films come out. Then 72's Deliverance, which, of course, again, huge hit, really pivotal in turning Burt Reynolds into a star, nominated for Best Picture and Director. Like I said, a classic film. 1973, he stars in The All-American Boy. 1974, he does Conrack with the Martin Ritt film, which it's a lot of supporters of that film. And it's after Conrack is the ODESSA File gets released. And then in 1975, he's in a film called End of the Game, which, interestingly, that film was directed by Maximilian Schell. So Maximilian Schell, for those not familiar, Academy Award-winning actor from Austria, won Best Actor Oscar for Judgment at Nuremberg, a couple other nominations in his career. Of course, starred in such films as Top Copy and Julia, the Jane Fonda film from the late 70s. He was in the Disney movie The Black Hole. But he directed a handful of films throughout his career. And so I'm assuming because of having worked with Jon Voight on the ODESSA File, that's how Voight ended up in End of the Game. And the other interesting thing about End of the Game is that the lead performance is played by Martin Ritt, who is a director by trade. Martin Ritt is known as a filmmaker, not an actor. And beyond that, the reason it's interesting that Martin Ritt was cast as the star of End of the Game is because he had directed Jon Voight in Conrack. So basically, if Conrack comes out that Martin Ritt directs Jon Voight in, then next up is the ODESSA File, where Jon Voight works with Maximilian Schell, and then End of the Game, where all three of them are together. And then that comes out in 75, and Voight had a little more of a supporting role in that film. And then it's 78, 3 years go by without any releases until Coming Home. And that's the film that wins him the Best Actor Oscar. So that's where Voight's at here, and let's kind of look at where this film drops to his career. The problem I have with Voight in this film is that it always feels like he's acting. And there are especially some really key emotional moments where he's really trying to express his passion for being involved with this hunt for the truth about Edward Rochman, where he's trying to communicate the fervor of his situation, and it's like those key emotional moments where he really definitely comes up short, and it just feels very forced. I don't want to come too hard on him, because I don't think that overall, I would not say it's a bad performance, but it's a performance where there's just some really noticeably weak moments. It's interesting because as the story, progresses, and I don't obviously want to be a spoiler guy, but there does come a point in the film where he has to assume a false identity, and I think it's in those moments actually where he's basically playing this journalist who's then playing another person. I think that those are some of the best parts of the film acting-wise for him. And, he's got a really good physical presence. He's tall, he's lean. There's a really good fight scene in this film. As the title, I should say, the ODESSA File, what that refers to, ODESSA was an organization of, like former Nazi officers who were basically working to help each other out, and after the war, and that's the organization that Voight kind of eventually comes up against in his search for Edward Rochman. And so, as he's getting closer to the truth, obviously the ODESSA are looking to eliminate him in his digging, and they send out their top guy to kind of dispatch him, and they have a great fight scene in like the third act of the film. And Voight really lives up to the requirements of that, just from a physical standpoint and physical presence. But it is, as the star of the film, to have these, like I said, these really kind of key emotional beats that you're just kind of coming up short on. And again, it's not that he's underplaying it or overplaying it. It just feels like acting. That's always been something that, even as a kid, and I really didn't know any better, like I was always like, there's something not right about his performance. The flip side of that, though, and we might as well, I guess, instead of just talking about the problems I have with the film and then getting onto the pluses, this would be kind of like, intercut between them two, because really the flip side of that is that he's surrounded by an amazing cast of character actors. absolutely amazing. A lot of the actors, they filmed this, most of this was filmed on location in Germany. They felt it was really key. That was a great decision. And so even there are some British character actors in the film too, but there's a lot of people from the German acting community. Gunther Meissner, the great character actor Gunther Meissner from In a Glass Cage and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and Hans Mesmer. He kind of plays the head of the Odessa in this film, and people know him as the prison camp commandant in The Great Escape with Steve McQueen. A lot of great recognizable faces. You also have the Irish actor Noel Willman, who people know from his key roles in Hammer films of the 60s, like The Reptile and Kiss of the Vampire. He plays one of the Odessa. And Derek Jacobi, or now it would be Sir Derek Jacobi. This is prior to I, Claudius. He plays, and again, a figure who has key links to the Odessa. And interestingly, the film he had done right before this was The Day of the Jackal, another Frederick Forsyth adaptation. And I've got to talk about Klaus Loesch, who plays Gustav, the Odessa's top number one hitman guy, who I mentioned, has a great fight scene with Voight. He's known for, he was in Sam Peckinpah's Cross of Iron. He was in the famous miniseries World on a Wire. Really well-known actor, but again, just dynamic physical presence. That's the great thing about these character actors. Not only are they really talented, but they just have such great faces, great looks, great command of the dialogue. They just know so often. I mean, Noel Willman, like I mentioned earlier, he has a really tense scene with Voight, and he just absolutely knows how to deliver the dialogue, when to pause, just the right beats to hits, the right rhythm. I mean, it's when you have a situation like this where maybe your lead isn't giving the 10 out of 10 performance for whatever reason. And again, and this is just my take, but what more can you ask for than to just have them surrounded by like a group of all-stars who look and sound and just act terrifically. Now, if you look at the top billing of the film, so, Maximilian Schell, he's like second billed after Voight, and Schell is a wonderful actor. The reality is, though, that he doesn't have a lot of screen time in the film. We see him in some of the flashbacks of life at the concentration camp as Voight's reading this journal, but he doesn't, he's kind of just doing your, standard evil Nazi commandant stuff in those scenes. It's not like there's a lot of introspective moments. It's more just, let's depict how evil he is, so we can kind of like set up the situation where Voight's going to track him down and set up who our villain is, and then we see him later on in the film. So by no means does he deliver a bad performance or anything like that, but he's really in a very small percentage of the film. Maria Schell, interestingly, his sister in real life, who is known for such films as The Brothers Karamazov, and she was in Superman with Christopher Reeve. She's in the film. She has a small part as Voight's mother. And it's the only film that Maria and Maximilian made together, although they share no scenes in it. And again, I'd say the same thing about her, which is fine performance, but really not in a lot of the film. Mary Tam, on the other hand, who is our female lead, she plays Siggy, which is Voight's girlfriend. Again, if you're gonna have some issues with your lead, and it's great to surround them with these great character actors. It's also great to have an amazing leading lady, because not only does she deliver a really warm, relatable performance, she's also one of the most beautiful women ever caught on cinema, on celluloid. Absolutely gorgeous. And Mary Tam, of course, is probably best known for her work on Doctor Who. She was one of Tom Baker's companions, and sadly no longer with us. But she is terrific. It's absolutely nails the look, but also just really, it's great to have her there as this person who really cares about Voight, but it's also under a lot of inner turmoil by the danger he's putting himself into. It's a very believable character. So again, Voight's, the issues I have with Voight at the same time, this kind of with the issues I have with Voight, that would kind of speak to a problem I would have with the film. But at the same time, it makes you kind of pay attention to everyone around Voight, and kind of that speaks to why you keep watching the movie. If you say to yourself, well, why do I keep going back to this film when the lead actor's really not nailing the performance? Well, it's because he's surrounded by, big leaguers, people who just are perfectly cast in the role. And every time, he's surrounded by anyone, or anytime you're cutting away from his character to other people doing stuff, you're always, on fire. It's great. So that kind of right there, that kind of speaks to both an issue I have with the film, but also why a strength of that film kind of serves as a counterpoint to it. I can see that even now talking about it, why I feel this way. How similar feelings emerge about other aspects of the film. Another problem I have with the film is Andrew Lloyd Webber's score. It's terrible. It's not really like in a lot of the film. It's not an overly scored movie, but it's this really bombastic musical cues he does, which just seem really out of place. He does them at certain moments where the tension is really rising up. You're really ratcheting things up, and he comes out with this. I don't know if it's the exact same cue each time, but it's very similar if it's not the same. And it just sounds like, I don't know what it sounds like. It's like almost really bad aggressive disco music or something. And it's just really, when I think of it, I think of Leonard Maltin, the film critic. He used to have the book of movie reviews, capsule movie reviews. I remember his review of The Giant Gila Monster, a film near and dear to my heart. He spoke about it having wildly inappropriate songs. I think that's what he said. And I always, when I watch the ODESSA File, and anytime that Weber comes in with his tracks, these kind of like ratchet up tracks, I always think of that review, pops into my head. It's like, this is wildly inappropriate music for this movie. But the flip side of that is it has this great Christmas song in it. I love the Christmas song of this movie, Christmas Dream, not just because it's an older Christmas song, not just because it's Perry Como. It's a really good song. And it's what, again, when I think back to watching this film over the years, and I think back to my memories of first watching it, I didn't really necessarily know any better about music when I was a kid. You just kind of listen to whatever is on, whatever your family listens to. We're talking single digit years here, but this song is something that always stood out in my head. It's something that appealed to my natural likes right from the get go. And Weber, along with Tim Rice, came up with that song. So even though he's responsible for the music beats in this film, which are really rough, he also gives it its signature musical success with giving this Christmas song, and of course having Como sing it is perfect. It was a great choice to have him be the person to sing this track over the opening credits. The look of the film, again, it goes to this kind of the same thing. It's both a good and a bad. One of the things that always stood up to me about this film as a real stumbling block for it, and it's, to be honest, even though I love 70s cinema, big fan of it, but this is a problem that was like, an epidemic of 1970s cinema. Is they'd make a movie in the 70s and they'd set it in a prior time period, but everyone would still look like they're out of the 70s. The haircuts, I mean, that's really where it's at, and it may sound like a minor detail, a minor quibble, but when you're setting a movie in 1963, and you're filming in 1974, and everyone looks like they're 1974, yet you really want it to be set in 1963. Like, you're tying the events of this film to key things happening in 1963. You're tying it to Kennedy's assassination. You're tying it to the ongoing conflict between Israel and Egypt, which is, we'll get a little bit more into that, why that plays an important part. So it's not just that you're just at the beginning of the film saying, oh, it's 1963, and then there's nothing plot-wise about the film that really is key to that time period. No, you're actually making a point of constantly reminding us that JFK just got killed, and that's affecting the politics, international politics, which then plays a part in other aspects of the plot. And then everyone's walking around like it's just 1974. That's a problem, because it takes away from the believability of this even being set in that time period. But where it becomes even more of an issue is in the flashbacks to the Holocaust, because now you're going back to 1940s and everyone still looks like they're in the 70s. I mean, Maximilian Schell's walking around with hair down past his collar and sideburns, and it's like he's supposed to be like, a Nazi commandant, a member of the SS, and he just looks like an actor from the 70s dressed in a costume. And it's that way with even the prisoners in the concentration camp. There's no attempt made whatsoever to make it seem like you're really in this place at that time. and it really does weaken the believability of it. Oh, I actually have a whole problem with a lot of like the concentration camp flashbacks in this film because they just feel very artificial. It never sells the horror of the Holocaust, um, and it's little things like that. It's even like the physical performances, some of the actors they got. There's like a scene where we're trying, the film's trying to sell the evil of Maximilian Schell's character, and he's walking with a couple of his soldiers by this giant pit, and these women are knelt down at the edge of the pit, these concentration camp prisoners, and one by one they're shooting them and they fall into the pit dead. And like there's like the actors who they got to play these parts of these women being executed like show no response, physical or emotional. It's like a gunshot goes off, there's a beat, and then they just slowly fall into the pit. It's like completely unbelievable reaction on their part, acting wise, physically, emotionally, on any level. And it's like all these things in these Holocaust flashback scenes, all these little problems with the selling the believability of these scenes, they really become kind of a weight dragging that section of the film down, because this is where we're supposed to get our motivation from, right? I mean, obviously intellectually, the Holocaust was horrible, and that the SS were horrible, and based on what you're told about this character of Edward Rochman, that he's an evil person, and you obviously have no problems believing that about him. But at the same time, from a more visceral level, it's not really selling that. It just kind of almost seems like, paint by numbers of villainy going on. We're going to tell you this guy's bad, and we're going to tell you he's a Nazi, and we're going to show you him killing innocent people, and you just need to buy that. This is some guy you're going to hate. Well, yeah, I mean, he doesn't look like a Nazi from the, he looks like an actor from the 70s, and he doesn't look like he's killing people. It looks like he's, has soldiers fire a gun, and then an actor is doing a really bad death scene. So that kind of stuff really works against it. And then speaking of the incongruity with the 60s and 70s, how the bulk of the film, the modern day narrative is set during the 60s. I don't know why they even bothered doing it, honestly. Like I said, there are plot connections in the film. The film actually opens up in Israel, and kind of aside from Voight's motivation to go after Rochman, the Mossad, the Israeli, secret intelligence, they're also trying to go after the Odessa, not just because they're, of the Holocaust and they're ex-Nazis, but also because now the idea of the story is that now a lot of these former Nazis have kind of reintegrated themselves into German society, and they've taken up positions of influence and power in business and in government and in the police, and they are behind this deal that's going to happen where weapons are going to be given to Egypt, and Egypt's going to take those weapons and use them to try to basically wipe out Israel. So there's kind of like this ticking clock in the background of all the events going on, of the Mossad having to also find Rochman and deal with the Odessa, because they have this time frame that they know they have to stop this weapons manufacturing from happening by. And likewise, the Odessa, the Nazis, they have a deadline by which they have to provide this weaponry to Egypt in order for them to carry out their plan. And I won't get too much into the details of all, but Kennedy's assassination basically kind of, has a relationship to the timeline of all this. And so that's why that is something taken from the book. That's why they feel the need to set this film in 1963, so that they can have this like basically larger scope ticking clock going on, a larger scope motivation. But in doing that, again, they basically make no effort to sell the reality of this being 1963. And when you really take a step back, you don't even need any of that stuff. The real solution would have been to like actually get someone on set who knew what people had their hairstyle like in the 1960s, or how they dressed, because that's the thing, like 1974, 1963, that's only like a decade, but there's a monumental difference in just the way people's fashion and styling in that 10 years. Monumental, because you had the whole counterculture movement. Like if it had been 1964 versus 1954, or even 1944, you could have gotten away with it. But, the counterculture movement obviously happened in the late 60s, and, the changes, like I said, in fashion and hairstyle were pretty big. And so it really, that 10-year difference between when your film's set and what your characters look like is a big deal. But like I said, the biggest solution here would not have been so much to do a better job at selling the reality of it, but would have been just to eliminate the whole idea of having it in 1963 at all. Because the way they handle it this kind of like overarching subplot of the Mossad, it always feels tacked onto this film. It never feels organic to the narrative. The opening scene, like I said, it takes place in Israel, and we see like this key Mossad agent, and then he kind of comes back into the film later on. By the time he comes back into the film later on, you're like, who is this guy? Oh yeah, it's the guy from like the first 5 minutes of the film. It really, you don't need it. You don't need it for narrative purposes, because the reality is that Voight is acting. Voight is hunting down the Odessa because of what he read in this dead man's journal. That's why he's hunting down the Odessa, and we can understand that motivation. He's a journalist. There's a story interest to it. He obviously, the fact that this was an innocent man who suffered a horrible life and then took his own life because he felt he was being ignored. And Voight feeling having an understanding of that. And what we can understand why Voight is driven to do what he needs to do. We don't need to have this whole Mossad weapons deal come into play, because it really doesn't add anything to Voight's motivation, because he doesn't even know that that's going on. And we don't really need it to raise the stakes. Maybe there was a thought like, oh, okay, part of this is going to be to kind of give it a motivation to the need to get rid of the Odessa and the reason why we need to get rid of Edward Roshman. Well, we know, we can relate to that again, because we know why Voight's motivated, because of this Dead Man's Journal, and also, Roshman's a next-Nazi, so we don't really need. He was a concentration camp commandant. We don't need to have anything additional added to his backstory to have a reason for him to be hunted down. I think the fact that he was involved in one of the worst massacres ever in history is reason enough for us to see him as the bad guy who needs to be dealt with. We don't need this extra layer of weapons manufacturing. But like I said, so it doesn't really add anything to our motivation to see Roshman's character dealt with. It doesn't add anything to Jon Voight's character's motivation. And okay, well maybe the argument would be, well, it adds something to the Mossad character's motivation, right? And the idea being that we have to have these Mossad characters in the film, and that's true. Like, you do need to have these Israeli agents in the film, because there comes a point in the film, again, it's not really showing any spoilers, where they cross paths with Jon Voight, and so they have they're on parallel paths. The Mossad being motivated to stop this weapons deal from happening, and Jon Voight with his motivations. And so maybe the thinking is, okay, well, we have to have this whole subplot about missile guidance systems and everything, because otherwise, how can we explain why the Mossad want to work with Jon Voight so badly on this whole scenario? Well, I think we know why they even if this missile weapons manufacturing deal wasn't going on in the background, we know the Mossad would still be hunting down Roshman because he's an ex-Nazi. That's what that's what the Mossad were doing at the time. Like Adolf Eichmann, he's even referred to in the film how he was captured and eventually brought to trial and executed. So we don't need that to explain the Mossad's presence in this film. Yes, we need to have the Mossad in the film. We need to have these Israeli agents because they're going to play a key part in developing the scenario with Jon Voight, but we don't need to have them have any other additional motivation other than the fact that they are, Israeli secret agents, and the bad guy here is an ex-Nazi. And so there's really no reason, when you look at all those different points I just brought, there's really no reason to have this kind of like subplot of the weapons deals going on, the bigger scope thing. And doubling down on the problem is, like I said, the fact that it's kind of like just shoved into the movie at points. It's like there's like this opening scene which just feels kind of like almost the opening scene in Israel just feels like almost like something that was shot after production ended. They're like, we need to have one more thing in there about this whole weapons deal and missiles and what's going on between Israel and Egypt. So let's just film this, over on the back lot. That's what it feels like. And the points in the film where the Mossad kind of amongst themselves reference the ongoing missile operations that the Odessa are involved in, it always feels like very almost like it's expository in a visual way. Like, it's not like just like a lot of dialogue about it, but it always just has a very expository feel to it. So that's a long-winded way of pointing out a subplot of the film that never feels organic, which is a problem I have with the movie. But also, if they had just removed that subplot entirely, not only would that have taken care of that, intrinsic problem I have with that, but also would have solved the whole problem of people looking like they're dressed 10 years later than the events are taking place, because then you could just set the film in 1974. It's totally believable that that wouldn't really change anything in terms of the key time of the events. There obviously were still Holocaust survivors 10 years later. There were still Nazis on the run 10 years later. In fact, the real Edward Roachman was a real person. And he was in hiding when this film was made, and the attention that the book followed by the film brought to him actually put renewed attention on the hunt for him in real life. So moving the film 10 years forward from the time it's set in, it would totally still be believable. It would solve the issue too that I have with like everyone just looking out of place, out of time. But again, you have the glass half empty, the glass half full. So yeah, there's this visual problem where everybody in the film is walking around reminding you that the movie is not actually taking place when it's supposed to be. But the other cool thing about the visuals is the overall look of the film. Where this film really benefits from it is shot well. That's absolutely true. It was shot by Oswald Morris, a great British cinematographer. He had won the Oscar for Fiddler on the Roof. He had worked with Ronald Neame before, for example, on Scrooge and The Man Who Never Was. Had shot a lot of beloved films. He had done stuff with John Huston, like Heaven Knows Mr. Allison and Beat the Devil and Moulin Rouge and Moby Dick. And you just look at his filmography. Here's just some of the other films that this guy shot. A really incredible resume. So some of the other movies he shot: The Guns of Navarone, Stanley Kubrick's Lolita, Tony Richardson's Look Back in Anger. He had shot Sidney Lumet's The Hill, Martin Ritt's The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. He had done The Taming of the Shrew with Burton and Taylor. He had shot Oliver, the musical, as well as the musical version of Goodbye, Mr. Chips. He had shot Sleuth, Joseph Mankiewicz's final film. After the Odessa File, he would shoot the James Bond film The Man with the Golden Gun, and followed that up with The Man Who Would Be King, The 7% Solution, Equus, and his last two credits would be The Great Muppet Caper and then The Dark Crystal. An impressive resume, to say the least. He absolutely turns in good work here. My only real problem with the cinematography, again, it's the Holocaust flashbacks. They're shot in black and white, which intellectually seems like a good choice, but they don't really feel like they're shot for black and white. They feel like almost like they lit those scenes for color and then shot them in black and white. They don't really take advantage. Like, you're obviously shooting these flashbacks in black and white to give a sense of age to the events, and also because of the horror of what's going on, to give a sense, a somber tone to these proceedings. And they just it feels like you're watching color footage that was then in post production made black and white. One of the great things about Star Trek, the original Star Trek series, was the way that show was shot. And it was deliberately shot. They shot it in color, but they lit it as if it was like for black and white. And you can see that in the use of shadows in that series. Even though the colors are beautiful and saturated and very much of their time, it's a totally different look than other shows of that era, say like, Green Acres or any other, like even Lost in Space, to pull up another science fiction analogy, where they were just kind of like, we got color TV now in everybody's homes, and everybody has color TV now, and so we can shoot in color, and let's make sure everybody's wearing really popping colors, and we're going to light every inch of the set so everything is seen beautifully and popping and everything. And when they did Star Trek, they're like, we got the same tools to work with. We got all the same rich color palette, and we know what we can do here, but let's give it a more cinematic look. Let's not just, flood the set with light. Let's really take from the lessons we learned in black and white cinematography and really take this to the next level. And so with the Odessa File, I think, really good work on Morris's part, but those flashbacks, they just don't feel like they ever really utilize, from an aesthetic standpoint, the fact that they're shooting in black and white like you'd want them to. It just almost feels by the numbers like, oh yeah, well, of course we'll shoot these in black and white. But as a whole, again, that makes up a very small portion of the film. The overall visual look of this film is really strong, and a huge reason for that is the decision to shoot on location. Absolutely crucial. I mean, I would one of the places I'd love to go before my time on this planet is over is I'd love to visit this area of Germany, Austria, Switzerland. I think that the architecture is incredible. Not just the more historical based architecture, like from ancient medieval times, but even like going into the 20th century. Just incredible work there. And like I said, the decision to film this on location instead of filming it in another country that kind of looks the same or building sets, that sells a reality of place that really helps to compensate for the lack of reality that we talked about with time element. Like, you never feel like you're in 1963. You never feel like you're back during the World War II era in the flashbacks, but you always feel like you're in Germany, and that you're right in the heart of, where these ex-Nazis are operating. And it's not just they filmed on location; it's the places they chose to film, the actual buildings. This incredible castle-like estate where Roshman is living, the third act of the film. All the little shops that they film at. There's a scene where Jon Voight encounters a member of the Odessa at a souvenir shop, and the place is just. I mean, it's obviously a real location. I don't know if it was really a souvenir shop, but it was a real place. It wasn't like a set, and it's just the way it's just cram packed with souvenirs and trinkets. You feel like you're right there. It's a great sense of place that is sold by choosing to film that in a real location, and we see these different members of the Odessa who are, in their current day jobs, whether they're working as a doctor or a lawyer, and they're obviously very wealthy and very successful. They have these huge offices, and the places, the houses and buildings that they chose to film, those scenes that are just incredibly richly styled and decored. I believe that there were many actual municipal buildings used in the filming of this. Like there's a government building that Voight goes to in order to investigate more about how the police are handling the whole problem of ex-Nazis. And it's just this massive, expansive government building. That's the cool thing about back in the 60s, too, is in the 50s and just basically the earlier part of the 20th century is everything was bigger. Like, not just the cars. Cars were bigger, obviously, because there was less concern about, fuel consumption, but even just, like, offices were bigger. Like, it was just, you'd have a room that was, as big as a cafeteria. It would just be your office. I mean, literally, there are multiple times in this film where you're seeing that happen, and it's not just like them, the filmmakers creating this as a pretense to try to tell you something about the character. Oh, he's ostentatious or whatever because he has to have the big office. No, you just know that was really they're trying to depict a successful person in business and what his office would be like, and that's what it would be like. It'd be like this massive, gigantic room that nowadays would be divided into like 20 cubicles, and it's something that really takes you back to that time of the mid 20th century to see things like that. There's a fantastic location they use for when Voight first decides to pursue the story as a news story about Rochman, and he tries to get funding from a paper that he works with a lot because he's a freelance. He doesn't actually work for a regular newspaper, and he tries to get them to give him a payout to get going. And it's just this incredible building where like all the walls, everything's all glass, and there's these beautiful like halogen lights, multicolored halogen lights in certain parts of the building. It's just absolutely great work on the part of the whoever's the location on this manager on this film. They give them the Oscar. If there's one winner in the Oscar, it's that whoever chose all these locations. They did do a little filming in England, and I'm pretty sure you can kind of tell when that is. There's a pretty substantial segment of the film where it's basically Derek Jacobi's part of the film, which takes place at this printing shop, and that I'm pretty sure is a set. The way it's shot and the way it looks, but even that as a set, as like the main actual set piece that was constructed for the film, still looks really good. Really, really works really well. It's a key to a main action scene in the film, and so yeah, it's again we're talking about pros and cons. You have this film trying to sell you on the events taking place during a certain time and completely coming up short, but they sure make up for it with selling you on the place and time, right? They totally get you there. And even like the fact, kind of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning about how they chose to have all these German character actors in the film. Imagine if they had shot this in another country. Like say they had shot it in England, because Ron Neame was a British director. He directed this film. and they had just tried to, make it, shoot it in areas that kind of had a similar architecture, and then they were pulling pretty much the entire cast, pulling from British character actors doing German accents. It's just not. They could have been the greatest actors ever and been the greatest command of their accents, and it just still would not have been the same. They were so wise to have done that though, because they were able to use the locations there. They were able to use the incredibly rich, incredibly deep field of character performers to fill out the rest of the cast. It was a really brilliant decision that really helps to compensate for where the aesthetic goes wrong. So we talked about the look of the film and the music of the film and the performance of the film, how they are this mixture of ups and downs, of good and bad. And what about the narrative of the film and the we talked about the subplot of the Mossad, but the overall narrative of the film. And again, I think that again touches upon this kind of same recurring pattern we're seeing. It's a really good meat and potatoes narrative. When you have a film, guys hunting down ex-Nazi and hiding. I mean, that's one of those surefire plot lines that it might not turn into a good movie. You can make a bad movie out of that for sure, but it's a very inherently fascinating plot line. This is a couple years before The Boys from Brazil came out, which of course is based on the Ira Levin novel about Joseph Mengele still being alive and trying to raise up a new Hitler. And the whole idea of like old Nazis in hiding, still carrying on their evil work, I think it's something that really fascinates people. So, I mean, we just had the series Hunters with Al Pacino out that just finished up its run. Or, even a show like The Man in the High Castle, where the Axis wins World War II. The thing about the Nazis is they were like so evil and yet so powerful, and the idea of what they would do if they could come back, what they would do, what would these people do if they were out of power and in hiding? What would their plans be? Would they be trying to resurrect the Third Reich? And that along with just the whole concept of like them being so evil yet having not paid for their crimes and being in hiding and on the run. These kind of storylines are just the kind that really interest us on a very visceral level. You could even reduce those to more fundamental levels, like in general, evil guy on the run. That's or even just guy on the run. That's generally a very captivating plot line to work with. Obviously, Hitchcock, most of his movies were about a guy on the run, and in his movies it was a good guy being mistaken for someone else or having thought to commit a crime that he didn't, but still was about a guy on the run, girl on the run. So when you add into the element of the hunt for this person, and then you add into it, you amp it up some more by having the person that's on the run be basically shrouded in mystery, which is kind of how Rushman is approached this film. Well, he's not someone, we're not constantly cutting back between Jon Voight and Maximilian Schell. It's really just a setup of Maximilian Schell's character and these flashbacks, and then Voight's going about traveling around trying to find him, see if he really is still around. And so enshrouding your villain on the run, in a sense, in this cloak of ambiguity as to where is he and what's he up to, that definitely amps up the interest you're going to have in it. It takes it from just being a chase, a find the person kind of a film, to adding an element of mystery to it. And then, like I said, I think there's this just historical interest we have in the Nazis, because, I mean, what was the last? That's really the last time we've ever seen anything like that. In history, where you have this power, what was really a superpower, threatening to spread evil across the entire world. We obviously still have evil in this world. It happens on a personal level. It still happens on a national level, where countries, oppress their citizens. But that was, and we do have global events happening like terrorist attacks. But that was the last time where you had like an actual national power um, really try to take their evil to a global level. I mean, I think the closest thing we've seen in our age is the Cold War, but that was really, it was kind of like this standoff between. It was more of a standoff rather than this this moving force. There's always kind of like a standoff between us and Russia and proxy wars and Korea and, Vietnam. And obviously things, tensions have heightened with Putin, and Putin has kind of, spread his power to, these satellite countries, but it's still not on the same level of like Germany literally trying to, with help from Japan, and Italy, conquer the entire globe. And it's the fact that they not only were doing that, but also that they were so, unashamedly barbaric that they were willing to engage in, genocide. It wasn't just that enough that they could control the world or punish people for the events of World War One. It was also about like wiping out huge parts of the human race who they considered inferior, and the fact that they got so close to it. Really, they did. I mean, if they had conquered most of Europe, if America hadn't been brought into the war by Pearl Harbor's attack, who knows what would have happened. So the idea that people like that are that evil and powerful and who are that accomplished in their evil could still be in the world somewhere, hiding on the loose, maybe trying to rebuild those plans. There is definitely something that fascinates an audience about that. And again, just because you have this tried and true storyline plot kernel doesn't mean you're going to have a good movie. People have taken these kind of tropes and totally, made uninteresting dreck out of it. But the ODESSA File does do a good job of just keeping the narrative interesting and engrossing, so that you constantly you never want to like stop watching the movie. You never are like, oh man, I just turn this off, or I want to go to the bathroom and just let it play for a bit. It always maintains your interest, and it does that by, first off, by really not divert. Like we did talk about like the Mossad missile subplot that is unnecessary, but like I also mentioned, that's something that kind of is injected into the film sporadically, so it never really derails anything, totally derails the movement of the film. The good thing about this film is that it really does, once things get going with Voight finding out about this diary and reading it and deciding to look for Roachman, it really doesn't slow down. It doesn't kind of decide. It doesn't then spend 20 minutes where we're just seeing him and his relationship with his girlfriend, or it keeps the wheels moving and focused on Voight's hunt for Roachman, and so it maintains this level of energy and interest that it makes you never want to leave the movie behind. And it hits it with some good action beats. Like I said, there's a really good fight scene that Voight has with Klaus Loesch. And if you've seen the poster of the film, that without giving anything away, that reference another really key action suspense beat in the film. So it does really well with just holding your attention. Now, I think narratively, well, first off, we kind of touched upon this. It never reaches, though, even though it does this really good job of holding your interest and maintaining your involvement, it still never reaches like, classic levels. It's never going to be a great film, a classic film, because it's doing what it needs to do. It's exercising the muscles it needs to make sure that you're on board with the film and staying on board with it. But it never reaches like the heights of a 5-star film or an A+ film, and part of that's just because of the things we've talked about. That's a big part is the fact that even though we know, like I said, we know intellectually that Roachman's an evil man and a true villain, because we just see him kind of doing by the numbers stuff in these flashbacks, and it never feels authentic to the time and place, and he's then gone for huge stretches of the film. There's never really a true sense of fear-inspiring villainy about him. I mean, I think that like you look at like Gregory Peck and The Boys from Brazil, which I'm not going to say that's the definitive Nazi hunting movie, but he does a better job, and that those filmmakers did a better job of showing him as that kind of evil and hiding. Or even Laurence Olivier in Marathon Man, even though he was more, his motivations were more monetary. These guys, those characters were better sold as evil and hiding than Roshman's is. And so that, along with just everything else we've talked about, that kind of holds it back from being at that kind of top of its game for this kind of film. And another part too is like Peter Miller's character. The character Peter Miller, played by Jon Voight, not just Jon Voight's performance, but the character itself is problematic. I think that Voight's probably a little older than this character is supposed to be. Not that Voight looks old or anything, but I think there is part of this character that was supposed to be a little younger than we see him. And I think maybe if they had more accurately age cast, that would have kind of helped. But the problem is that the character makes some like really blatantly dumb decisions in this movie. And even if he had been younger, they still would have been really dumb decisions. Like early in the film, as he's hunting Roshman down and trying to, finding out preliminary information about Roshman, Voight attends this big reunion gathering in this huge beer hall of all these former like Nazis and German soldiers. And, he goes in there just kind of like, he's just starting to find out about this whole news story and dig deeper into it. And so he goes there and, there's all these people drinking and having a good time. It's really loud and there's some guys doing some speeches. And again, this isn't like any kind of spoiler or anything, but as these guys are giving, talking to their former comrades in arms about how, the German people will need us someday. We'll be back, all that kind of stuff. Peter Miller, this character, decides to whip out his camera and take a picture with like the brightest flash bulb ever invented. And of course, everyone's like, "Whoa!" And turns to him, looks for a second, and goes back to the carousing. And Voight realizes he made a big mistake, and some of the big wigs and of the ex-Nazis start sending their goons after him. But it's just such a blatantly stupid thing for someone to do in that kind of situation. I think if you're like hunting for a Nazi war criminal and by this time in the film you already know that the police aren't really doing much about it, and then you're staying in a room with like 200 ex-Nazis who obviously want to see the Fourth Reich rise, it's probably not a good time to like pull out the flash camera. I mean, probably not a smart move. And if that was the only thing he did, then that would be me kind of like nitpicking. That'd be like, well, there's this one thing he did that was poorly motivated. But there are multiple times where Voight's character does stuff like that. The whole, I can't give too much away because spoilers, but like the whole reason that Voight ends up in a fight later on in the movie with Klaus Loesch's character is because he did something really stupid, which tripped up his identity. So there's these key moments in the film that really raise the stakes for Peter Miller's character and his physical safety, and they're motivated by just really stupid, unbelievably stupid decisions he makes. So that's a problem with the Peter Miller character. The other problem with the Peter Miller character is his personal motivation for getting involved in this whole narrative. Now, he reads the journal. He's obviously looking for a news story, so that's part of his motivation. But what is his true motivation? Is he motivated by horror about what the Nazis did, and he wants to bring Roshman to justice for his evil acts, or is there something else that's personally motivating him besides that, and besides his interest in just getting a good news story? I can't really dive too much into that without revealing spoilers. I will just say that it's very murky what his motivation is. And I think that what the problem they ran into is in the book. I have not read the entire book that this is based on. I remember my dad had a bookstore, and he used to have a copy of it early in the early days of the bookstore, and I remember thumbing through some pages of it. And then I did cheat and read the Wikipedia breakdown of the novel because I just don't have the time to read through the entire book before this episode. I would like to actually kind of dig into the entire book at some point just because I've seen the movie so much. But I know that basically in the book, his motivations are clearer. But I think when they made the movie, if they had stayed true to his motivations in the book, he would have been a less typical protagonist, Jon Voight's character. And I think they were afraid that he would be less likable and less relatable. So they wanted to try to play it both ways. They wanted to try to basically nobilize his motivations, yet at the same time kind of keep his hidden motivations from the book. And they try to kind of play it both ways, depending on what scene you're in. Like you'll be spending large parts of the time with him and thinking he's motivated by column A, and then there'll be a couple scenes near the end where he's motivated by column B, and it just feels like choppy script writing. Like they're trying to stay true to the book, but also try to do what they think will please the audience. And it's a problem because it just muddies the water. So you have this character who's, played by an actor who's a good actor, but not necessarily giving the performance you really want him to, and he's engaged in this hunt for this vile Nazi, but he's making a really blatantly dumb decisions along the way, and then you're not even sure totally why he's doing what he's doing. That just ends up in kind of a mess. It's never a mess in the sense of like, again, it's not like a confusing mess in terms of the narrative. You always know what's going on, and you're moving from point A to point B, both in terms of time and place, and you're always familiar with the continuity of things. The film's never narratively confusing, but this character just becomes kind of muddy. And between all these things of the performance and the motivation of the character and his poor decision making at times, and the fact that I think he is supposed to be a little younger than he was cast, it basically leaves you with a protagonist who is kind of a mess, and it just doesn't seem like. And then you add into the fact that he's supposed to be 1963 and he looks like he's from the 70s. It just you end up with a protagonist that you just doesn't seem believable. It's never to the point of ridiculousness. It's not like they took Jerry Lewis out of The Nutty Professor and dropped him into the middle of the ODESSA File, but it basically weakens the realism of the film by having this problematic protagonist. So why do I love this film so much? And I think in having this personal psychological appointment that is also serves as a podcast, I think the thing that stands out to me is this really is a film where, what does they say? The sum of the parts is greater than the whole. I think that's what's going on here. Yes, you have some very obvious and very central problems with this film, like the performance of your lead actor, like the character of your lead protagonist, like the something as basic as setting a film in past time periods and not selling that the movie is actually set during those times. And these are things which could often derail a movie because they're so. This is your main character. It's not like you're having an issue with, Roche, the character Rochman, of his motivations. We know he's evil. It's not like you're having an issue with the performance of Jon Voight's girlfriend, Siggy, played by Mary Tam. It's it's not like she's in her scenes of the film she's letting you down, but she's just like a supporting character essentially. No, these problems are affecting fundamental, foundational parts of the movie, your main character, and the believability of the time that the movie's supposed to be set in. These could really be a big issue, but there is the things that we talked about that the film does well at. They overwhelm that. They don't just counteract the problems of the film, but they are greater in number. The things that make this film work tip the scales in their favor, even though they're fighting against pretty overwhelming odds. You're basically saying, all right, our lead character, he's kind of does dumb stuff, and we're not sure why he's doing stuff, and his performance is going to be all that great, and he's supposed to be, we're supposed to have parts of the films in the 40s and parts in the 60s, but it's always going to look like the 70s. That's a lot to ask of the rest of your film, the periphery of your film, to overcome. It's a lot to say, oh, well, let's make up for those weaknesses with the supporting cast of character actors who don't have a lot of time individually on screen. Let's make up for that with the places we're going to shoot. Let's make up for, Andrew Lloyd Webber's bombastic score with a Christmas song at the beginning that will be memorable. And it works. It really does work. This is a great example, and this is why I keep coming back to this film, of how you can have a movie with huge again, very key flaws, very defective key components, and yet so many other departments of the film, so many other areas of the film are delivering 11s out of 10s, that it just creates this wave that just raises the film up despite everything. It's like the Titanic going down because it just hit an iceberg, and then like a tsunami comes along, a tidal wave comes along and lifts it up and carries it to land. I mean, it's that kind of thing where like there's just so much going right for the film, and so many areas that sometimes are taken for granted. Like sometimes you take for granted the fact that what locations you're going to shoot at. In no way am I trying to pat myself on the back or anything like that. But like the last Frankenstein, it was really, we talked about this last Frankenstein. It was really important for me, the places we shot the movie at. I didn't want to just shoot at any restaurant. The scene where between Jason Frankenstein and Barbara Devine, I wanted to shoot at the restaurant we shot at, Valentino's, because of the look of the restaurant and how beautiful it was and how vintage it was. I didn't want the characters just to be dressed in any clothing in the modern day scenes of that film. I wanted them to have a vintage aesthetic to their clothes, so they have the actors wear bootcut jeans and vintage paramedic uniforms. And that's the kind of thing that that can really cover a multitude of sins. You have to really not take that stuff for granted when you're making a movie. Not take for granted not just in the case of the ODESSA File, what country you're shooting in, but even what buildings you're shooting in. Not taking for granted the casting of really small roles that really might not have a huge bearing on the plot or might not take up much screen time. And they did so good on all those levels, all those different aspects, that it really does shoulder the weight of the film, and it makes it a film that is a good movie. Again, it never takes it to that, oh man, this is a 3.5 out of 4-star movie or something like that, but it's a movie I come back to every year. That's saying a lot, and that speaks to what the film does well. Because if every component of this film was viewed by me the way I view, say, Voight's performance, it would be a movie that, I would have seen it with my grandfather when I was young, and I probably would have revisited it once or maybe twice in the last 30 years, and that'd be it. That's it. I've seen this movie, though. I can't know how many times I've seen this movie. It's ridiculous. There are movies that I think are far greater films and far more impactful on me that I haven't seen half or even a third as much as I've seen the ODESSA File. And yeah, there's definitely a nostalgia component there. Obviously there is, this film from your childhood and a film that connects me to my grandfather. And I'm a big Christmas guy and I'm a big vintage guy. So it's there are other reasons that this film speaks to me. But again, if it wasn't working as a film in so many ways, it's not a film I would go back to this much. It still has to be doing its job as a film. And it does. It does. How did this film do at the time it came out? I'm not really sure. I was looking up numbers. So it comes out in 1974. By 1976, it had brought in $6 million, but I have no idea what the budget is. I couldn't find anything out on any of my traditional sources. So I'm not really sure what the cultural relevance of this film was at the time it came out. I mean, the film may very well have been financially successful, but I don't think it ever had that kind of, it never landed in the zeitgeist the way that like Marathon Man or The Boys from Brazil did. I know Ronald Neame, the director, wasn't really happy with it overall, I don't believe. And we should take a moment to talk about him. Ronald Neame, legendary British filmmaker, career goes way back, at least to the 1930s. And started out, he didn't direct his first film until 1947, but before that, he was producing, he was a writer, he was a cinematographer, he was a visual effects artist. He did a lot of films, a lot of collaborations with the great David Lean. They worked together on In Which We Serve and Great Expectations and Blythe Spirit. And these are films where, Neame might be writing or being a cinematographer or an effects artist or many of these things. And he actually had a couple nominations for Best Screenplay for his work with Lean. He was nominated for both Brief Encounter and Great Expectations, and had another nomination prior to those for special effects for Whenever Aircraft is Missing, the Michael Powell Emmerich Pressburger film. So he was kind of a person who wore many hats, and then kind of eventually settled down on directing, and had a lot of acclaimed films up to prior to this. Movies like Tunes of Glory, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, which won Maggie Smith her Best Actress Oscar. He had done the original Gambit from the '60s, which what was it, like 10 years ago? The Coen brothers wrote a remake of that. The Man Who Never Was, which is highly regarded World War II movie with Clifton Webb. So prior to this, 1970 was Scrooge, the musical version of A Christmas Carol starring Albert Finney. Then 1972, The Poseidon Adventure. He directed that with Irwin Allen. So The Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno, those were the films that kind of helped kick off the whole disaster genre craze of the 1970s. And Irwin Allen, because he was responsible for so many entries in that genre, was known as the master of disaster. And his first two leaps in there were The Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno. And on both of those films, he would basically produce the films. He would direct like the action scenes, and then he'd have another guy directing like basically the actors. And so Ronald Neame and he teamed up on that for The Poseidon Adventure. And then after The Poseidon Adventure, he did the ODESSA File. So it was 1970 Scrooge, 1972 Poseidon Adventure, 1974 ODESSA File. Doesn't direct another movie for 5 years, and that's Meteor. It comes out in 1979. And just as The Poseidon Adventure is known for kicking off the disaster genre, Meteor is one of the films that brought it to an end. It was a huge box office bomb. It was financially disastrous. Scathingly reviewed. One of the kind of like the last whimpers of the disaster of the '70s. It's a movie I love, anyways. But sometime we'll go into disaster movies. So he does that in 1979. Then 1980, he teams up with Walter Matthau to do Hopscotch, which is an adaptation of a novel by Brian Garfield, author of Death Wish, and that is a well-regarded film. Criterion Collection put it out. And I watched that with my girlfriend a few years back, and I remember there was a bonus feature on that where it talked about how Neame really wanted to do a better film, and that he wasn't happy with his last few films. So I'm sure that was a reference to Meteor and the ODESSA File. I don't know if that includes Poseidon Adventure or not, but obviously he wasn't really. It didn't sound like he was really crazy about the way the ODESSA File had turned out. But that's okay, because I'm here to sing its praises every day, every Christmas. I definitely encourage you to check it out. I don't know what the status is of its availability in America right now. It was made by Columbia, so it's owned by Sony. There was a DVD that might be out of print now. There was a Blu-ray from Image Entertainment. It might be out of print. I think that's probably out of print too now. But over in the UK, they put out on Blu-ray a few years ago Indicator, the great UK label. And that's what I own. And, it's got some really good extras on there, a booklet about the film. So definitely, it's definitely a streaming. I know for a fact it's streaming. I know it's on like YouTube and maybe Prime. But check it out if you can. If you want, wait till next Christmas. I won't hold it against you. But it's, be interested to see how other people, I'd be interested to get feedback about how other people respond to the film, because there is that nostalgic factor. I can't deny that it plays a part. But at the same time, it does have its own strengths. Again, this is not a movie I would go out and be like, oh, you got to see the ODESSA File. That's a movie I recommend. But it is one that holds its own. Like I said, despite its flaws, it's a good example. If you're trying to find it, a movie that is that film that keeps its head above water despite a lot of weight trying to drag it down. This is a good example of that. So for that reason alone, I think I would recommend watching it. And Perry Como and Mary Tam, who's absolutely lovely. But anyways, that's it for this week's installment of Carpet City Cinema. Thank you for tuning in. Please continue to give us the love wherever you can, liking our videos on YouTube, giving us great reviews for the podcast, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we will be back next year. We will be back with another installment in another week. All right, take care.